Welcome back again to the fourth edition of NFL Weekly. I'm Nick Sinafani,
I'm Brenden Garula.
and let's get right into our games this week.
Game number one, we got the Steelers hosting the Bengals in a rivalry matchup. Mason Rudolph making his first career home debut. James Conner went off in this game. 10 attempts for 42 yards on the ground, but in the air is where he really made a difference. 8 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. He went off this week, making his first really good fantasy start. On the Bengals side of things, Andy Dalton struggled. Only 171 yards and an interception, no touchdowns. The Steelers destroyed the Bengals on Monday Night Football, winning 27-3 at home.
Our next game takes us to Lucas Oil Field, where the Colts are taking on the Raiders. Another solid game from Darren Waller, who's looking very impressive to start the year, as well as Tyrell Williams, who continues to be a consistent touchdown catcher. Josh Jacobs with another solid game to add on to the good start of his rookie year, rushing for 79, while also putting up 29 on the receiving end. For the Colts, Jacoby Brissett threw for 265 yards and 3 touchdowns, but that wasn't enough, and the Raiders took this one 31-24 on the road.
Game 3 takes us to Atlanta as the Falcons host the Titans. Matt Ryan threw for a solid 397 yards, but no touchdowns to count for. Devontae Freeman having trouble starting the run game once again with only 28 yards. The tight end for the Falcons, Austin Hooper, had a very good game, 9 receptions and 130 yards. On the Titans side of things, Derrick Henry had 27 attempts and got to the 100-yard marker. A.J. Brown on the receiving end gets his first touchdown of his career, hauling in 3 receptions, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The Titans take this one 24-10 on the road.
Now we head to MetLife Stadium, where Daniel Jones is making his first career home start. He completed a good amount of his passes, but he did throw for 2 picks. And Wayne Gallman had a breakout game, rushing for 63 yards and a touchdown, and also hauling in 6 for 55 and a touchdown on the receiving end. A very good waiver claim pickup this week. Case Keenum was benched by Jay Gruden, and Dwayne Haskins came in long awaited by Redskins fans and threw his first career touchdown, but the problem was it was to the wrong team. Haskins threw 3 picks on the day and only threw for 100 yards. This just was an overall horrible game for the Redskins, and they dropped to 0-4 while the Giants go to 2-2.
Next, we head to Houston as the Texans host the Carolina Panthers. Deshaun Watson, nothing to count for, with 160 yards, but nothing else to add to his stat line. Carlos Hyde, 58 yards on 12 attempts, but again, nothing to count for. DeAndre Hopkins, not a horrible game, but it was not as good as he could have been. 5 receptions for 41 yards. On the Panther side of things, what can I say? Christian McCaffrey went off once again. 27 attempts, 93 yards and a touchdown on the ground, but through the air is where he really made a difference. 10 receptions and 86 yards. He's a great fantasy pickup, especially for PPR leagues. The Panthers take this one 16-10.
Here we got the Dolphins taking on the Chargers, where early the Dolphins were actually hanging in there a little bit, taking their first lead of 2019. But then Phillip Rivers activated, throwing 24 of 30 for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Austin Eckler continues to be a very impressive dual threat player in the Chargers' backfield, rushing for 60 yards and a touchdown, while also hauling in 62 yards and a touchdown on the receiving end. Dontrell Inman with a very impressive game too. 76 yards off of 5 receptions. And Josh Rosen looking like he could be the starter of this team, throwing 17 of 24, 180 yards and a touchdown, while also throwing a pick, but that's obviously the most impressive stat line they've gotten from a quarterback this year. Even though this was so far the best game they played, they still took a 20-point L to the Los Angeles Chargers.
Next game, we had the Lions hosting the Kansas City Chiefs between 2 undefeated teams. The Chiefs at 3-0, and the Lions are at 2-0-1. Matthew Stafford had a pretty solid game, throwing for 291 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kerryon Johnson, 26 attempts and 125 yards, despite a fumble on the 1-yard line, where the Kansas City Chiefs took it 100 yards to the end zone. On the Chiefs side of things, Patrick Mahomes threw for a solid 315 yards, but he didn't have a touchdown for the first time this year. LaShawn McCoy had a solid game, 56 yards and a touchdown. The Chiefs take one late, 34-30.
Now we head to Baltimore, where the Browns are taking on the Ravens in a long-awaited matchup. Baker Mayfield putting up 342 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, finally having the game that most Browns fans were looking for this season, while Nick Chubb also had a breakout performance, putting up 165 and 3 touchdowns on the ground, including an 88-yard touchdown run. Jarvis Landry, it was a big three-headed trio on the Browns offense this game, with Jarvis Landry hauling in 8 catches for 167 yards. And on the Ravens side of things, Lamar Jackson had another impressive game, throwing 24 of 34 for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns, as well as 66 on the ground. Other than that, not too much to say other than this Ravens defense needs to step it back up. The Browns take this one 40-25.
Next, we head to the AFC East, as the Patriots and Bills have their undefeated matchup. The Patriots, on their side, nothing to count for, as they only put up 16 points, and Tom Brady only threw for 150 yards. On the Bills side of things, it was even worse. They only put up 10 points. Josh Allen only threw for 153 yards, also throwing 3 interceptions. Frank Gore did have a pretty good game, rushing 17 times for 109 yards. The Patriots take this one and remain undefeated, 16-10.
We head to the Coliseum in a very high-scoring matchup between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Rams. Jameis Winston continues to be the most inconsistent player in the NFL, somehow throwing 385 yards and 4 touchdowns, while Jared Goff throws 68 attempts, completing 45 of them. Those 68 attempts are the third most in NFL history, throwing for 517 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Chris Godwin with another very impressive game, looking like he could overcome Mike Evans' wide receiver 1 spot, catching 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Buccaneers take a very surprising one, 55-40 on the road.
Next, we head to Arizona as 2 dual-threat quarterbacks clash head-to-head. The Seahawks with Russell Wilson and the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. Russell Wilson threw for 240 yards and a touchdown. Also with Chris Carson rushing 22 times for 104 yards. On the Cardinals side of things, Kyler Murray did not have a very good game, throwing for 241 yards and an interception. But David Johnson did have a very good game, 40 yards rushing and 99 yards receiving. But that's still not enough as the Seahawks take one on the road, 27-10.
Now we head to Soldier Field, where the Bears are taking on the Vikings. Mitch Trubisky goes down early, so Chase Daniel has to come in relief, and he shut it down, throwing 22 of 30, throwing for 195 yards and a touchdown. And this Bears defense, finally someone who can hold Dalvin Cook, only rushing for 35 yards off of 14 attempts. But Stephon Diggs finally had his breakout game, catching 7 for 108 yards. With Allen Robinson on the Bears' end also putting up an impressive game, 7 receptions for 77 yards. The Bears take a low-scoring 16-6 at home to move to 3-1.
Next, we head to Mile High as the Broncos take on the Jaguars as Joe Flacco throws for 303 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Emmanuel Sanders hauling in 104 of those yards. But on the Jaguars side, that's where it really made the difference. Gardner Minshew leading a surprising comeback, throwing for 213 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Leonard Fournette has a huge day, rushing 29 times for 225 yards. The Jaguars take this one late, 26-24.
Now we head to New Orleans, where a very anticipated Sunday night matchup between the Cowboys and the Saints took place. Dak Prescott only thrown for 223 yards, no touchdowns, and also throwing 1 interception. Jason Witten, very surprisingly, leading the Cowboys receiving attack, hauling in 4 receptions for 50 yards, and Zeke being held to less than 2 yards a carry, but also punching one in for a touchdown as well. Teddy Bridgewater completing a very impressive amount of his passes, throwing 23 for 30, but only 193 yards, no touchdowns and a pick to go with it. Alvin Kamara with a decent game, putting up 17 attempts for 69 yards.
Nice.
And Michael Thomas, again, being very consistent this year with 9 receptions for 95 yards. The Saints take a low-scoring 112-10 and go to 3-1, while the Cowboys go to 3-1 as well.
Next, we head to Lambeau Field as the Packers take on the Eagles on Thursday Night Football. Aaron Rodgers had a very impressive game, throwing for 422 yards and 2 touchdowns, despite throwing an interception. He also had a pretty good rushing attack with 5 attempts for 46 yards. Devontae Adams had a huge game on the receiving end, hauling in 10 receptions for 180 yards, averaging 18 yards per reception. But on the Eagles side of things, Carson Wentz threw for 160 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Jordan Howard had 15 attempts, 87 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The Eagles take this one on the road 34-27.
Let's hop right into our Team of the Week segment, which we had to give to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in an anticipated road blowout, they came in and dropped 55 on the Rams' heads, with Jameis Winston throwing for 385 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber both punching one in for a touchdown, and Chris Godwin and Mike Evans both having very, very good games on the receiving end, with Godwin putting up 172 and 2 touchdowns, and Evans putting up 89 and a touchdown. Cameron Brate also with a touchdown catch as well. The defense didn't play as well, but it didn't matter because the offense was dominant, and they take a 15-point win on the road against the very good Rams.
The player of the week will go to Leonard Fournette, rushing 29 times for 225 yards. No touchdown to count for, but he had a long of 81-yard rush. Even against this very good Denver Broncos defense, he destroyed them. He also hauled in 2 receptions for 20 yards, but that wasn't the big difference. He rushed for 225 yards. Yes, you're hearing that right. 225 yards. That's insane. Staying on this game, though, our mustache of the week, once again, goes to Gardner Minshew. What a great performance in that comeback win. He's actually doing pretty well for a backup quarterback, throwing for 213 yards and 2 interceptions. It might just be the mustache.
Thank you for joining us on our Week 4 segment of NFL Weekly. I'm Nick Senefani.
I'm Brenden Garula.
And we'll be back next week to recap all of Week 5.